Be a barbecue hero with delicious, ultra-low net-carb Hero Bread, buns, and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories per serving. Oh, and did I mention they taste like their mouth-watering traditional versions? I mean, what's not to love? Use code AH10 for 10% off your first Hero Bread purchase at hero.co. That's AH10 for 10% off at hero.co.
The new book is called Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life, and that is an understatement. Born male, actually in that form, confined, boxed in, because from a very young age, she knew she was supposed to be female. I'll let her tell that story. But first, the background: being an Army veteran, served in the Vietnam War, woodworker, model airplane builder, and dog lover. So, Susan, thank you. I'm really glad you're telling your story because I think you're going to help a whole lot of people. So thank you. I wanted to start off with that. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I really do hope to help people that are coming up behind me.
2 terms that you say in the book that you really would like to get people get their head straight on. And one is gender and the other one is sex. Where do we start from there, before we go any further, getting those 2 defined better?
Well, based on my military experience, I like to use terminology that's very distinct. And the problem is, too often people confuse gender and sex, and they use those terms interchangeably. And I think that causes a lot of confusion. To me, sex and gender are 2 very different things. As somebody put it one time, gender is between your ears and sex is below the belt. Gender, once it's established, so far as I know, I've never heard of anybody that successfully changed their gender. However, changing sex, that's a physical thing. That can be done with relative ease, relative ease compared to some surgeries.
Gender. You said in the book, you, at a very young age, and this was a moment like a divine revelation, that you had this epiphany. That is absolutely extraordinary. What happened?
On that particular day, I think I was about 6 years old at the time, and I was just getting ready to go out and play by myself in the backyard because my parents were off doing their own thing. And I was just getting ready to open the door to go in the backyard, and it hit me like a bolt out of the blue. It was like somebody turned on an incredibly bright spotlight in my head and explained that I should have been a girl. And it almost knocked me over. The problem was that, even at 6, I knew there wasn't anything that could be done about it, but it was a revelation, and it was something I had to live with for many, many years until the time where I realized that I could actually do something about it. Once that happened, there was no turning back. I had to go and proceed with the surgical change to bring my sex into alignment with my gender identity.
See, that's the fascinating part about this, is that at a young age, you knew that things were out of alignment. That for you, you had to be undercover in a lot of ways to not reveal that you didn't have, I guess, the same tracking that other people have. You didn't automatically want to go play with boys, do the things that boys did. You said your mom even got you a doll out of some quirk because you didn't know if she was maybe clued in and maybe she wanted a girl instead of a boy, but your dad was saying no, and instead she was insisting that. You thought, well, maybe there was some kind of an indication at that time that people might be aware of something you didn't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. The problem was that nobody ever explained any of that to me. I have no idea why she wanted me to have that doll. I don't remember playing with it that much. I do remember, of course, I would always play with boys at that young age because everybody was telling me I was a little boy. They didn't know any better.
How did you know you were different?
Well, it was, like you say, that epiphany, if that's what you want to call it. Once that happened, I realized that, I'd been born the wrong sex, but I kept it to myself because I knew there wasn't anything that could be done about it. And I realized that, if I had mentioned anything about it at the time, my life would have been a living hell. So I just kept it to myself. And by strange coincidence, after I was after I'd become an Army helicopter pilot, and after I'd gotten married. One day I just happened to catch a TV interview on the Phil Donahue show, of all things. A young girl named Canary Khan. And I was attracted to her because, she was a very good-looking girl. But the problem was that she was essentially telling my life story, and I'd never met her. And it was explained on the show that she had had a sex change. And I thought, oh, wow. Now it is possible that I can get something done about this. And so from that point on, the door was open, and I had no choice but to go through.
And that was after you were married and had the child?
Yeah. That's one of the things I kind of wanted to help people with in my book. I made two of the most routine mistakes that people make when they realize they're transsexual. You want to cure yourself. And you try almost anything. The two biggest mistakes people can make, and I made both of them. I got married thinking that would cure me. Well, that didn't. I joined the military thinking they'd make a man out of me. Well, they won't. And they didn't. Everything just kind of came to a head when I saw that interview and realized that I had made both of those mistakes, but there was nothing I could do to undo it. I just had to proceed with the change and take life one day at a time.
My guest is Susan Calvin, the book Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. And this is a reflection on what it was like to change sex. This is one of those things where there's not a whole lot out there, even now, even though we're hearing all sorts of stuff about gays, lesbians, homosexuals, bisexuals. There's so much information and not enough context. So if you haven't had in your environment, in your personal history, contact with people of other persuasions, maybe that's the way I can say it, and equalize the whole thing, then there's a whole lot we can learn. And talking to somebody who's been through this process from start to finish, you've had the best of both worlds. To be able to have a family, experience life as a male, and then go the flip side and understand some of the challenges that females face, especially the instance when you were in Iran in the service, that I think gives you a full spectrum of what it's like to be fully human on so many different levels. So your story from the start as a kid, what was it like growing up in Independence?
Well, to me, it was perfectly normal. I had other children to play with, although I was keeping my little dark secret. I just never let on, and nobody ever suspected until the time that, like I said, the interview with Canary Khan just pretty much changed everything. I did have to keep the secret all the way through high school, and I had a really good friend, lived a couple of houses down the street from me. His name was Charlie, and I think sometimes he probably suspected there was something different about me. Every once in a while, I would manifest some small feminine behavior, and he'd catch me on it and remind me that maybe I shouldn't ought to be doing that. But other than that, he was just a very good friend.
Now, your parents, what was it like? Were they supportive? Did they have, we talked in the last break about the doll, but what else went on at home?
My parents never really got along well, and that's something I just never figured out. It seemed like the two of them hated each other. And that was always confusing to me. I just always wondered, how the two of them actually got together, since they really didn't seem to like each other. And that kind of placed a burden on me, because it kind of forced me to keep to myself a lot. And then when I was in high school, things finally came to a head, and they did get divorced. But my dad never knew about my transsexualism. Mom didn't know about it until after that Canary Khan interview. I wrote her a letter explaining what was going on. And I think it kind of caught her off guard, but after a while she came to grips with it. And she was supportive to the extent that she actually paid for the surgery.
Mm. Wow, yeah.
And she accepted me as a female.
You said she even bragged about you as her daughter.
From time to time, yeah. I think she was actually happier with me as a girl than she'd ever been with me as a boy. I wanted to bring up something as far as terms go. Gender, sex, male, female, boy, girl. being a man or a woman. To me, you can be a male without ever being a man. Two different things based on my experience. There's a certain quality to being a man that doesn't necessarily line up with being a male. That's kind of hard to explain. I never thought of myself as a man. I knew I was a male, but I just never experienced that quality of manhood that other boys experience as they become young men.
Back with more of Susan Calvin's story, Changeling, the unremarkable story of my remarkable life. Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio.
And the second tour, I ended up flying an air ambulance. And that's the job that I really, really liked. I'd do it again in a heartbeat if somebody'd hand me the keys to a Huey. But unfortunately, I think I'm a little too old for that now.
Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio, Susan Calvin, and the book Changeling, the unremarkable story of my remarkable life. Just real quickly, going back to the surgery and that the defining thing of making you from, the sex part from male to female. I mean, when you had the operation, did you automatically feel fully female?
Oh, at that point, definitely, yes. I mean, that was when I woke up from surgery and they said everything went well. That was one of the highlights of my life. I knew at that point that there was no way anybody could take me back to what I had been. Now, up until the surgery, there's always the possibility that you may not be successful. After the surgery, there's no going back. And to me, that was great. To be honest with you, going back would kill me.
Okay.
There's just no way I could go back to being a male.
Again, going back, it was an interesting childhood because here you're talking about a mom and reading the book who was in contact with Bess Truman and Harry Truman. And it was a different time because they could actually walk down the street and not need security, escorts. They could just walk down Independence, out town, whatever they want, do errands, and one-on-one with the public. That is completely different than what we experience now.
Oh, you can't do that now. But back then, life was different. It was more parochial, I guess. And, I never actually met either Bess or Harry, but I do remember Mom talking about them. Apparently, she and Bess got along quite well.
That one little signature element places you in that timeline. Your surgery was 1982, is that right?
Yeah, November of 82.
Even then, that's still controversial. And that's still, that to be able to have done what you did at that. I think that Biber's dolls, the surgery you had in Trinidad, Colorado, and Dr. Biber, am I pronouncing the name right?
Yeah, his name was Stanley Biber. And one of the interesting things about that is that he was one of the premier sex change surgeons at the time. Somehow or other, it just happened that a lot of the people that were his patients ended up referring to themselves as Biber dolls. So, I'm affectionately known as a Biber doll in the community. And I wear that moniker proudly.
Well, but it also sounds like you had to make sure you found the right people, the right place, the right time to be able to do this successfully.
You want to make sure that you've got a good, reputable surgeon because you don't want them making a mistake.
Talk about the mistakes, the things you wish you had done ahead of time. One of them was the electrolysis with the beard.
Yeah, well, I had nobody to guide me back then. And so I was just kind of struggling around trying to figure out what to do next. And without guidance from other people, I made several mistakes. I went ahead and had the surgery before I got voice therapy. I waited a little too long to get electrolysis, although I did finally get it done. It took about a year to get rid of my beard. Well, actually, I joined a group down in Florida, a support group. And believe it or not, a lot of the transvestites in that group were really helpful to me with things like mannerisms and makeup. So that helped out quite a bit. But I think nowadays those groups are more readily available. Mm-hmm. Back then they weren't.
Okay, and the difference, transvestite, again, versus transsexual.
Transvestites, they're not interested in actual sex change, although they do want to appear as female. And so, the group had several transvestites in it. And they were really helpful to me. And they're really great people. When I first went down there to join the group, I was scared to death. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know if I was going to get mugged or what,
Mm-hmm.
But they ended up being some of the nicest people I've ever met, some of the most intelligent people I've ever met. They really helped me quite a bit.
Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio, Susan Calvin, and the book Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. All right, you served in the military, and this is what's fascinating. Vietnam, you were there not once but twice. You said you went into the Army thinking it would make a man of you. Was that like a wake-up call when it didn't happen? How did that work?
That was my desperate attempt to try to be a male or be a man. And it's just something that doesn't work. If you're transsexual, the Army will not make a man out of you. And it's not their job. So I can't blame them for that. But it was my attempt to try to cure myself because I didn't know any better. And I had 2 tours as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. I started life over there as a gunship pilot my first year over there. And the second tour, I ended up flying an air ambulance. And that's the job that I really, really liked. I'd do it again in a heartbeat if somebody'd hand me the keys to a Huey. But unfortunately, I think I'm a little too old for that now. I like to kid some people that, if the Army were to call me back right now, that would just be a sign of desperation on their part.
You said it did a number on your back.
Yeah. A Huey is very, very hard on your spine over the years, and it finally caused 2 desiccated discs in my back. And that's really what led to my retirement. I was having so much back pain. It was just getting physically painful to fly. And it just finally got to the point where I had to retire.
You went a different direction in terms of flying with, and explain this to me, because I know these are like radio-activated airplanes.
Yeah, I belong to KCRC, the big radio control flying club here in town.
Mm-hmm.
And I build large, mostly scale radio control airplanes. And, it kind of helps me keep connected to aviation. And along with that, I'm also a member of a local Experimental Aircraft Association chapter. And I kind of keep my hand in it through there. I'm always around people that are fellow aviators.
And going back to the childhood, your dad, who was also a pilot?
He was a private pilot. He was never a military pilot.
But he was trying to push you in a different direction, and you had already been enamored with flying.
Yeah, he tried to push me into electronics or electronics engineering, and it just wasn't my thing. I tried, but I just never had an interest in it. And then one day I got a postcard from the Army that says, hey, would you like to fly for the Army? I thought, well, hey, here's my opportunity. So I signed up. And for the next 27 years, I flew helicopters for the Army.
That's incredible. Really incredible. When you're talking, and I like the military background because your thoughts are so clear, so logical, and so fluid. For anyone reading your book, it's a very clear outline of what you went through and the relationships along the way, some that worked and some that didn't. You butted heads with some people in authority, and as a result of that, don't have a high opinion of the male element.
Well, let's put it this way, and I tell people this. I essentially turned my back on everything male in my life, and I don't miss it. I'm 100% woman now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. In fact, I tell people that being female is one of the best kept secrets I know.
And there are a lot of women who would just be absolutely floored at that statement because they feel that they're confined. They don't have the same kind of benefits and, the glass ceiling kind of thing. They promote men more than women. And what is your experience with that?
Well, because of my military experience, I probably don't have the same background that most of the women do. It took me a couple of years once I began the process. They did take me off flight status for a while, and I fought with them and finally got back on flight status and flew for several more years as a female before I had to retire because of my back injury.
Yeah.
But I've never experienced the glass ceiling because I was working for the federal government, and things are a little bit different there than they are in the civilian world. So, I haven't experienced the same thing that most other women have. but I can certainly sympathize or even empathize with them. I think females, women, they get the short end of the stick too many times.
We need to take a quick break right now. The book Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. This is a very, very well-written book talking about a transformation. I was talking to somebody saying I was going to be doing this interview with Susan, and as I was talking, this butterfly flew from the top of the tree, and I thought, how appropriate, because that's what this is, this transformation. And the deal is there were some hardships along the way. We're going to get into more of that, talking about needing a support group and having people help you and just getting the vocabulary straight on this. Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio. Susan Calvin in the book Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life.
In fact, as far as I know, nobody still understands why some people end up this way. It's just a question for the ages, and just it may not have an answer. And, physically or mentally, we're not different from anybody else. We just have this one little issue where apparently the programming in our brain doesn't conform to our biology.
Wendy's Coffee House, Susan Calvin, and what it's like to transition from male to female.
I think females, women, they get the short end of the stick too many times.
You spoke about that when you did time in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And you
I was a flight instructor for Bell Helicopter over there for about a year.
You might downplay this, in my opinion, just because it sounds like getting out of there was a stroke of luck.
Well, that was before I had my surgery, and
Mm-hmm.
before any of this took place. But I could tell that was a society I would not want to be a part of. We did have issues with Bell Helicopter at the time, and in fact, we ended up going on strike. It was pretty tense for a while. Fortunately, one of our people was also a relative of Secretary of State, I think at the time, trying to remember his name.
Henry Kissinger?
Henry Kissinger, yeah. He's the one that actually got us out of the country without being shot. Because there was some talk about putting us in front of a firing squad.
You were trying to be union. You were trying to organize a union in that country.
Yeah, kind of went over badly.
Yeah, and wanting to have you shot. Okay, see, some of this you downplay, which I think it's brilliant, but at the same time, it's like, holy cow, what were you thinking?
Well, you have to remember that I'd already had 2 years in Vietnam, so being shot at was not something new to me.
Yeah, you're almost bulletproof.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I've been shot down twice, so it was nothing new.
Yeah,
threatened like that. I've never been physically injured. I did lose a helicopter in Vietnam. I had one literally blown in half on me just after we'd put the skids on the ground. My main concern was I wanted to get my crew out. I got them out okay.
Yeah.
Didn't lose anybody.
And that was extraordinary,
the helicopter is nothing but a pile of ashes now.
See, some of this stuff has a whole lot more drama. So I'm thinking if there were a movie version of this, there would be a lot more pyrotechnics involved because you just...
Well, you know how Hollywood gets.
Okay, we could spend hours talking because you have more stories and these are downplayed. There's just very dry in your book. So everybody gets the facts, the details, but there's a whole lot of, I think, embellishment that could happen in a rewrite, like that story of being in Iran and possibly the rumor was you might be shot and getting out of there very quickly, which is what happened. There's some more stuff that we haven't covered. I'd like you to add and fill in some blanks. Can you do that for us now?
Sure.
What about the brain thing?
Okay. One of the researchers at the University of Texas Medical Center came up with the theory that maybe our brains were different, and that's what made us transsexual. So what they did, they had a bunch of us come down there, and they did MRI scans of our brains, and it turned out that our brains are just absolutely indistinguishable from anybody else's. But they did give me pictures, and in fact, I included a couple of pictures of my brain in the book.
Yep.
So that you can see that, my gosh, I am normal.
You have a brain.
I have a brain, and
yes,
it's normal.
That's good. See, I think there's still a lot of confusion about that, wanting to give you something unique that says if we isolate and identify this, we can fix it. And so far, that hasn't happened.
Yeah. No. In fact, as far as I know, nobody still understands why some people end up this way. It's just a question for the ages, and just it may not have an answer. And, physically or mentally, we're not different from anybody else. We just have this one little issue where apparently the programming in our brain doesn't conform to our biology.
The other thing,
since you can't change the programming in the brain, the only alternative is to change your biology.
yes, and that takes a lot of commitment and a lot of, I think, in terms of what you're going through, trust, because you're going to get mixed signals from people around you. And you talk about that. There was one guy that you were friends with, you thought, for a long time before you made the transition, and then trying to reconnect, it was like, nope, the door shut.
Oh, yeah, that was my friend Wayne from back in high school. He was just one of those people that couldn't handle it and decided that it would be best if we didn't have anything more to do with each other. So I said, well, fine, that's your call.
And
I let him get on with his life, and I got on with mine.
There's a strong theme with your religion, and you are very solid in that. And not only that, you know your scripture.
Well, I do read the Bible every night. In fact, I've read the Bible from cover to cover, several times. And I did mention in the book that during my second tour in Vietnam, I did have an experience where I was totally alone in my barracks, and a voice occurred in my head, and that voice just simply said, "Your father wants you." And I looked, and there was nobody else in there with me, and the voice was entirely within my head. It wasn't from outside; it was from inside. That was a life-changing experience for me. And I think God and I have a very good relationship. One of the things I like to point out to people is that God doesn't let just anybody make this transition. And I make the comment, too, that, some people will say that God doesn't make mistakes. I agree with that. He doesn't make mistakes, but he does make some very special people, and we call them transsexual.
You had to be a very strong person to go through this. There were so many challenges, so many speed bumps, so many wrong turns that actually had some benefits, like getting married. I do believe that you developed a decent relationship with your ex-wife and a wonderful relationship with your daughter, and not everybody has that opportunity.
Well, the upside to all that was the fact that I do have such a wonderful daughter. Had I not gotten married, that wouldn't be the case. However, I try to warn people that if they think marriage is going to cure them, you're making a mistake. It won't. So you have to think about that and think about the other person. You don't want to put somebody through this if you don't have to. So often I hear people say, like parents, for example, they fear that they're losing their child. It's like somebody's dying and you have no control over it. And my take on that is that you're not so much losing a child, but you're going to get a better child back on the other side. Don't think of it as that they're dying. They're just changing. And they're going to be so much better and so much happier when the procedure's over.
You've had a lifelong connection to dogs, and you still do.
Yeah, in fact, I had a little dog in Vietnam that used to go flying in my gunship with me.
That was a neat picture, too. A little Sloopy, it like fits in the palm of your hand, and then a little later when you show, there's another picture. There are a couple of pictures there of Sloopy. So
yeah,
with that, was that a comfort?
I've had dogs for as long as I can remember. Yeah, I guess you could say it was a comfort. I like being around dogs. I still have 4 of them. And as I like to tell people, they're nice enough to let me sleep in their bed.
Yeah, that's a dog person, yes.
So, yeah, I'm a dog person.
Well, I saw that when you're telling the story, that the dogs you had as a child, and that was tough. Losing a pet is always...
Oh, it's always tough. Even as an adult, it rips your guts out to lose one,
Yes, absolutely. So seeing
but
that...
I look at it this way. They'll be waiting at the gate when I get there, and we'll have a good reunion.
And that's the thing about your faith. You are so rock solid in your belief that comes through in the book. Going through all of these challenges, you go back to God has a plan. He's
always had a plan in my life. The only thing is he rarely lets me in on it until it's over. But
it's kind of the way it works.
I've learned I've learned to let God take the lead. He knows what's best for me, and He opens doors at the right time. He kind of points me in the right direction from time to time. And so, yeah, I feel very close to God. I couldn't have made it without Him, put it that way, because He did open a lot of doors for me.
If someone were listening and going through this same thing of knowing that the body doesn't fit the gender, what could you advise?
Find a good support group, because you're going to need like-minded people to get you through this. And don't be afraid to have a relationship with God. He's not an ogre. You have to do your best to get along with Him, and have faith, and let Him take the lead, and you'll get through it. And don't let people beat you up when it comes to religion. One of the things I know for sure is that transsexualism, as a subject and as a process, is not even addressed in the Bible. Some people want to beat you up with Scripture, but my experience has been that the people that try to beat you up the most have probably never read the Bible and don't have a clue what they're talking about. So don't let that get you down.
With this entire experience, there's a quote you talk about. You want to share that? This is, in Living and Dying.
On page 173, I make the comment that in a very real sense, I've lived and died and lived again. And borrowing from something Canary Kahn once said, I've enjoyed the greatest life and death adventure a person can experience and survive to tell about it. You can't improve on that.
Susan Calvin, the book Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. Wendy's Coffee House, KCMO Talk Radio, Susan Calvin. At the time that you were very conflicted and deciding, I have to do this, who came through for you?
I don't think I could mention just one person. There was a lot of people at the time, mostly other girls that I was flying with. In fact, I've still kept in touch with some of them. They were quite supportive of me, and I got a lot of advice from them, and I think they were kind of glad to have me on board. In fact, one of the nicest things that somebody ever said to me was one of the nurses in one of my doctor's offices. When she told me, she says, "Welcome aboard." And that told me that, I was being accepted as a female and as a woman. That was really nice for her to say that. It meant a lot.
Well, I think in terms of the requirements before you had your surgery was a year of dressing up and fully acting in public like a woman and filling that role.
Oh, yeah. That was scary the first time I went out in public as a female. That was one of the things about the support group I went to down in Florida, that they helped me, they prepared me for that first outing. And I'm always conservative, so, I dressed conservatively. And at the time, my hair had not grown out, so I was wearing a wig. And I went to a local shopping mall down there and got out and went inside. And like I said, I was scared out of my wits because I was afraid that somebody was going to read me. And I realized what I was. And unfortunately, that was not the case. But I remember walking past an escalator, and a couple of young men were coming down off the escalator. And I was afraid they were going to turn around and see me and make something of it. And they did. They turned around and walked right past me. Didn't even give me a second glance. And so I went from just absolute fear that I was going to be discovered to the very next thought was, well, wait a minute. You guys just walked past me and ignored me. What's going on with that? So that told me right there that, I'd made it. I was presenting adequately as a woman.
Yeah. A lot of women have had that experience, okay?
Oh, have they?
You walked by me and ignored me. Hey, whoa,
yeah.
What's going on?
What's the matter with you guys? But anyway, I gained a lot of confidence from that, and it was really helpful. It told me that I was definitely headed in the right direction. Of course, to go along with that, you always have doubts, and even up to the time I had the surgery, I would think, well, am I really doing the right thing? And immediately after that thought was the thought that, well, the alternative is unacceptable. There just was no way I could go back. It just wouldn't have worked.
Well, it would be living life in the closet and not who you really are.
Right. And so there was just no going back. And so that's how I went into the surgery. And then when they woke me up and said, yeah, it's over, you're a woman now, that was such a good feeling. I could relax after that.
You went through it in 1982, and there are people now who don't even know who to talk to or how to approach the subject, or, in fear of it. Even though we've got all these marches and all these protests and all this in your face, we need to acknowledge people of other persuasions, and that's the best way I can put it, to give everybody all one umbrella instead of doing all of the consonants.
Now, there is one thing I do have a little problem with, and that's people that like to get in your face. I just can't do that. Just doesn't seem right to me that you should get in somebody's face. You can't make them like you. And that's just the wrong approach. I mean, I think it's great that there are groups that are supportive. But this is an issue. It's almost kind of like Christianity. You don't force it on people. People have to accept it over time. And I think that will probably happen. But you just have to give it time. People will come around. Society will come around. You just don't want to force it. There are several groups in Kansas City. You can find them on the internet. If you just go into the subject of transsexualism, you can find groups. And just, if you find one that you like, stick with it. If you find one that you're not comfortable with, go to another one. Eventually, you're going to find people that will support you and steer you in the right direction. But just don't give up. One of the problems that people have is that too many of our ilk that end up committing suicide because they don't get the support they need. I cannot condone suicide. That's just something that's just totally foreign to me. And I don't remember if I mentioned it in the book. I was talking to a psychiatrist down at Fort Rucker one time, and their thing is they always ask you if you contemplated suicide, and I got so tired of hearing that question. And I really messed this guy's day up. I said, well, no, I haven't thought about suicide, but I thought about homicide. The poor guy tried to leave his office. He was afraid I was going to hurt him.
Like, okay, end of session.
Yeah, I had to call him back and say, look, it's just my weird sense of humor. You got to remember, I'm an Army helicopter pilot. We have a twisted sense of humor. But what was so funny was that this was a guy that actually used to fly with me on missions in order to get flight pay. And, I would have thought that he had figured out my sense of humor by that point, but for some reason that day he actually took me seriously.
Yeah.
Almost felt bad for him. And, thinking back, I probably shouldn't have made that comment. But
oh, no, I'm glad you made it.
We got it straightened out.
I'm glad you made it.
And,
he needed to know your humor and that you had humor.
If you're going to be an Army aviator, you've got to have a sense of humor. Maybe a little twisted from time to time, but you've got to have one.
I think your book is going to do a lot of help for people who are needing more information and concrete information from somebody who's lived it, and that's what you offer. Again, the book is Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. Susan Calvin, I appreciate your time, and I hope that you get some, at least a lot more support and some questions, because I think you're qualified to give people some very, very helpful and authentic responses that they might need in terms of not going through the suicide trip, because there is a way out, and it's going through.
Well, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And there's no reason to do that. If things are that bad, then there's only one thing that can happen. They'll get better. Don't hurt yourself just because you're a little bit depressed. Life is grand on this side. I got to tell you, I wouldn't trade this for the world. I'm happier than I've ever been.
You knew from the time you were a child that you had a different reality than what you were born with in the physical, and you were able to complete the transition.
I just hope the book actually helps people that are going through the process. I know there's a lot of people coming up behind me.
Absolutely.
I know they can use help, and it's out there. And it is a wonderful life. Once you get on this side of it, it's fantastic. Being female is the best kept secret I know.
Susan Calvin's book is Changeling, The Unremarkable Story of My Remarkable Life. You can get it on Amazon. Do Google if you need more information about transsexualism. If you need more definition of gender versus sex, then that's available too. Thanks for listening.